Jeanna Thomas from SB Nation joins us now to talk about the Falcons on this Memorial Day weekend. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
OTA start up this week, and a lot of fans have a lot of questions. They gave them to you. You're going to answer them. So here we go. Question one. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Mikey O2 wants to know about the depth of the D-line. I would enjoy hearing your assessment of our current D-line and how it compares to some of the best in the NFL. What do you say, Ms. Thomas?
I think that they've done a really good job of building depth along the D-line, and we saw this unit take a huge step forward last year with Vic Beasley leading the league in sacks, and we saw guys like Adrian Claiborne stepping up and Courtney Upshaw, and just, you know, kind of seeing more pressure come from everywhere, but they still continued to address this offseason with Tack McKinley, and so I think that we can expect to see that group take another step forward next season. But I think that they've done a really good job of building depth there and elsewhere on the roster.
Speaking of the D-line, C10 wanted to ask about Dwight Freeney, who's still a free agent, of course. Do you expect to see Dwight return as a player, coach, or not return at all?
I think if Dwight returns, he will return as a player. I don't think that he will return as a coach at this point. I think he still has some gas left in the tank. I think that he can still contribute. He certainly did last season. I know that I would like to see him come back. I love the impact that he had on Atlanta's young players last year, just kind of teaching them how to be students of the game, how to learn to pick apart film and identify opponents' weaknesses. And I know that the young players would also like to have him back, so I'm hoping that that's something that would happen closer to training camp. Older players, they don't really want to do all this off-season workout stuff, and I really don't blame them.
Who does? All right, let's get to the line on the other side of the ball. Random Axe. He wants to know, if Schweitzer wins the starting right guard spot, who is the swing tackle? Is the staff as concerned about the O-line depth as I am?
I understand why people are concerned about the O-line depth. I mean, certainly we all saw what happened in 2014 when they lost so many offensive linemen to injuries, and it was very problematic for the offense, and the offensive line was such a big part of why they succeeded last year. So I get that. I don't think that the staff is as concerned. I do think that Wes Schweitzer is probably pretty prepared to step into that role. He came out of a very similar system at San Jose State. He's been in the system for a year now, so I think that he's pretty prepared. And then they drafted a guard in this draft who can kind of serve as a backup, I think probably on either side. So I don't think that they're as concerned about the depth as fans might be.
Yeah, fans are always concerned about everything, are they not?
Yes, and I don't blame them.
Next question. We know the Falcons have a lot of impact players at corner. Candler Curtis asks, who will play opposite of Trufant? Who will play in the spot? And will we see Brian Poole taking snaps at free safety? So
one of the things that I think is kind of interesting about Dan Quinn and the way that he runs this team is I think that you're going to see Brian Poole and some of these other players, DeMonte Casey, the guy that they just drafted, I think you're going to see those guys taking some snaps in the slot and also at free safety, providing some competition for Ricardo Allen. They're just going to kind of see where guys fit best and how they can best feature them. That's the way that Dan Quinn always likes to say it. As far as who's going to play outside opposite Trufant, I'm going to be very surprised if it's not Robert Alford. And I think that, you know, if they could get Jalen Collins to be a really reliable starter outside, we could see them switch and put Alford in the slot. I think that there are a lot of options, and I think that we may see a lot of different combinations in the defensive backfield during training camp, especially as they try to figure out how guys best fit in those roles.
All right, so we had 4 or 5 different questions about the transition from Kyle Shanahan to Steve Sarkisian and whether we'd see any big changes in the offensive playbook. Justin D wanted, he says, Shanahan was known to be a more rigid guy. Do you think Sark's openness to listen to the players more will benefit the team? And on top of that, do you think we'll see any noticeable changes in the scheme? Lots of questions there.
Lots of questions. Okay, so I think that, yes, part of the reason that they wanted to bring Sark in is that he is a player's coach, and he is somebody who is able to relate to the players. The players feel like he's approachable. Devontae Freeman told us last week that they can go to him and say, hey, this isn't working for me and this is why, and that he's willing to adapt and adjust so that the players feel more comfortable and feel like they can succeed in what they're doing on the field. So I think that that's a real positive for him. As far as, I have forgotten the other part of the question. That was a lot of questions.
Will the scheme change?
I don't think that we're going to see big changes to the scheme. And I think that that was another factor with bringing in Sark. I think that they felt very confident that he could come in and run a very similar scheme to the one that Kyle Shanahan used to get the team to the Super Bowl last year. So I think that that was a big part of it. I think that we may see them emphasize the tight end more. That may be one bigger change that we see, but overall, I don't think that it's going to be any dramatic changes.
So we have a two-part question from maybe the best username on SB Nation. Julio, how did he catch that Jones? Good name, right?
Good one. Yes.
He asks, do you think Takk McKinley will be ready for training camp? Also, in your opinion, how many bone-crushing hits do you think Neil will have this year?
So great username, great questions. I think that Takk, I'm optimistic that he'll be ready by training camp. I know that he's working very hard to rehab that. Now that he's back at UCLA, he is rehabbing that shoulder 6 days a week. He's doing everything that he can to get back on the field. So if it's at all possible for him to be back on the field for training camp, he will be. As far as Keanu, does he deliver any hits other than bone-crushing hits? I think they will all be bone-crushing hits.
I would have to agree with that. And finally, we have one from that one dude, M. That might be a little bit ambitious, but why not? That's how fans are. Considering the season the 71-72 Dolphins had, do you foresee a 19-0 season? Of course, the undefeated 72 Dolphins lost the Super Bowl the previous year. Maybe they won't go 19-0 this year, but can you foresee the Falcons maybe going back to the Super Bowl?
So to the first part of the question, it's very, very hard to be undefeated. That's why it hasn't happened in so long. And I mean, you look at the Panthers a couple of years ago, and that was a great team, and they went 15-1. If you'll remember, their one loss came at the hands of the Atlanta Falcons. So, but it's very hard to go undefeated. I'm not going to predict a 19-0 season. I think that that's way too ambitious. But as far as getting back to the Super Bowl, I think the talent is here. I think that they've retained the core group of guys who are responsible for getting them there. And I think that Dan Quinn really has a winner's mentality, and he has this team laser focused on that goal. So I do think that getting back to the Super Bowl is possible this year.
So here's the deal. There's not a question Jeanna cannot answer. You did an awesome job. I'm sure fans are going to love to hear all about these Falcons. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to check her out on SB Nation.
Thank you so much for having me.